Good morning, everyone. My name is Jasmine. I'm with CorKat Data Solutions based out of Loveland, Colorado. Today we're talking about no tricks, just compliance, CMMC for NOCO manufacturers, or really any business that's working with government contracts. So like I said, brought to you by CorKat Data Solutions. We're a local company, and then we partner with SOPHOS. So they are one of the leaders in cybersecurity. And I'll introduce Laura more in a minute. So if we want to jump into introduction and agenda, really this is a niche webinar because it's been pretty unclear as to, what exactly that they're looking for. We've been talking about it for the last few years. The deadlines keep getting pushed back. And it's like, what do they actually want from us? So today we're trying to make it very simple and clear about what the next steps are and what some of the deadlines moving forward will be. So to kick things off, a little bit more about CorKat Data Solutions. We are a managed service provider and data center based here in Loveland, Colorado. We specialize in proactive IT support, cybersecurity, and cloud solutions. We were founded in 2002 on the belief that our clients deserve elite enterprise level services without that headache or expense. And so let's meet Laura. She is our security operations solutions engineer with SOPHOS, and will kind of be leading us through this webinar today. And then I'll jump back in at the end to kind of wrap things up.
Perfect. So we have a spooky agenda today. We're going to go over the transformation of cybersecurity, how it's been going through and changing over time, understanding the basics of CMMC. Additionally, if there are any other compliances and frameworks, we can touch on those ones. Also, if you do not meet these compliances, what are the consequences of these failures? How can Sophos help and the next steps for CMMC compliance? So starting off here with the transformation of cybersecurity. Cybersecurity is constantly evolving and changing over time. And during that change, this has gone through and started off with a focus on endpoint security. Originally, endpoint security was focused just to be an antivirus solution, which had static detections, and that's really gone through and evolved further. As attacks have gotten more sophisticated and there's other techniques such as living off the land or utilizing tools that you would utilize in your environment traditionally, this evolved into extended detection and response. This is able to go through and pull in additional telemetry from whether it's going to be from the endpoint events and server events to also pull in from other locations. And finally, it has evolved into managed detection and response because it's not just enough to go through and have the data there, but really needing to go through and have eyes on it on a 24/7 basis, identifying trends and attacks before they evolve further. There's some additional features that have gone through and also been implemented. Features such as data loss prevention, so going through and identifying if data is going outside the company. Application control to lock down what applications that users can access. Web control, because they shouldn't be visiting certain websites. And strategies like vendor consolidation to go through and really have everything in a single pane of glass, or being able to have eyes on each other to help identify different attacks, and multiple layers of defense here. I want to really dive into the layers of defense. Think of it like a castle. You want to go through and have those different layers, whether you're going through and having the moat, having it on a hill so it's hard to go through and reach, different castle elements, such as having watchtowers. If we think of it like a ring, you can go through and think of it coming from the outer perimeter. So going through and doing vulnerability scanning and penetration tests. Where are your holes? Where are your weaknesses in your castle? Having that firewall, so that impenetrable wall only allowing certain entries and exits. Identity, having those guards there saying, who are you? Are you allowed into the castle? User training, training those guards and also the people in the castle to say, should you be going through and doing this? Is this suspicious behavior? Having email protection to go through and protect against phishing emails and malicious links. And last but definitely not least is the endpoint and server protection on those machines. So how does this go through and work into CMMC? And what is CMMC? CMMC, or the acronym fully laid out, the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, is a framework developed by the US DoD. This is going to go through and make sure that anyone who is working with the DoD, so contractors and subcontractors, are going through and making sure that the information is protected. And this is going through and being classified into two parts, the Federal Contract Information, FCI, and the Controlled Unclassified Information, or CUI. So CMMC is based off of several different cybersecurity standards, primarily focusing on NIST. And this is going to be required for any type of organization that is doing business with the Department of Defense. So if you are going through and having contracts with them, or you've gone through and received an alert from a vendor or contract that says you need to follow CMMC, this is the webinar for you. There's a few layers of CMMC. First off is going to be the foundational level. So like we talked about, the FCI is going to be going through and protecting that information. This is going to be the easiest to go through and accomplish. There are 7 practices that you have to align, and you're going to go through self-assessment. This is identifying that you are going through and identifying that you have gone through and reached these requirements. So the purpose is really to go through and make sure that anyone who's a contractor is handling that federal contact information and keeping it secure. This, again, through self-assessment, it's going to be a little bit easier to go through and take action on. So a few examples of the practices, things like physical protection, limiting physical access, monitoring and controlling communication, and identifying information and system flaws in a timely manner. There's several other practices in there, but I just want to touch on a high level what that includes. CMMC Level 2 is advanced. So this is going through and focusing on the CUI. Now, if we remember what CUI is, it's the Controlled Unclassified Information. This is going through and making sure the fact that you're doing a self-assessment and normally requires a third-party assessment as well. So during an assessment, you'll want to make sure that you are complying with 110 practices from NIST 800-171. And last but not least is going to be level 3 here. This is more involved going through and making sure the fact that you are complying to NIST 800-172 and really is for very sensitive information. Most companies are going to be aligning to NIST level 1 or to level 2. I know I talked about it a little bit earlier, but just wanted to touch on the assessment here. So this is going through and making sure that if you're a self-assessment, this is going to be applicable to level 1 and some level 2. This is through the Supplier Performance Risk System. So this is a website that you would go through and confirm that you are going through and putting in those security controls in place. Third-party assessment is going to be going through and being conducted by a third-party organization. And this is double checking that the security controls that you have in place are actually there. So I always recommend when doing an assessment, making sure to double check yourself first, preparing for it, then going through and performing that third-party assessment. Traditionally, you'll need 2 key documents. So the system security plan, so describing how those controls are implemented, and also a plan of action and milestones. So this is going to have documenting on any type of gaps and remediation plans that you are going to be putting into place. Importantly is the CMMC timeline and due dates. Now, these are constantly going through and evolving. So if you're looking at this webinar further on, they may have gone through and changed. We've seen over the last few years that these have been being pushed back because we really want to make sure that all the parties involved have been having enough time. So the final rule was published back in October 2024 and effective December 2024. Now we're doing, not we, but the government is doing phased rollouts beginning around November 2025. So you might start to go through and see if you are working with the Department of Defense that you are having a self-assessment assigned. So I want to highlight we are right where that yellow arrow is right now, just before those phased rollouts. But you'll see these go through and start to appear in contracts, confirming that you are aligning to CMMC. Now, if you're looking forward towards the future and you're going to be bringing in DoD contracts, it is going to be mandatory for all new DoD contracts starting October 2026. So you have about a year from now to make sure that you are in compliance with CMMC. And this is planned for full implementation 2028. So I get a lot of questions about CMMC traditionally when it is brought up, and a lot of times there is the understanding that CMMC only applies to prime contractors. And in fact, anyone who is handling that CUI must comply. So any type of subcontractor, think of it, as the layers of defense. Similarly, the layers of going through and providing information over into those contracts. So if you are in the line there, you need to be making sure that you are also complying. And next up, if there are any exempt options for small businesses. And again, all businesses and the supply chain are subject to CMMC. There are no exemptions. There are no, write-offs, even if you are a small business. Even if you're small, you're very important. You have to make sure that you are complying and keeping the information safe to be able to work with the DoD. And finally, a lot of times I get the understanding that CMMC is just another checklist, just that you have to go through and check the box, you're good. But you really need to make sure that you're fully implemented and having continuous monitoring in the environment. It's important to make sure that you are secure because you are handling sensitive information. And with sensitive information, there is great responsibility. CMMC isn't the only compliance framework out there. There are additional frameworks. This is going to go through and include ones such as NIST. We talked about NIST earlier and the fact that CMMC is based off of NIST. NIST is a framework or a guideline on how to go through and manage and reduce cybersecurity risk. So just at a high level for going through and having NIST, it's going to go through and have recommendations on how to go through and keep that security in place. So things like making sure that data is encrypted, making sure the fact that you do have protections in place to make sure that your environment is scanned for malware. There's a long list of items in there. Traditionally, we recommend going through and taking a look at it. And also, we'll have some hints at the end of how to go through and comply with NIST and CMMC. If you do have any healthcare information, any type of PHI or protected healthcare information, so think about like medical records or doctor's visits, that is going to go through and be under HIPAA. If you're going through and storing credit card information, performing credit card payments or processing that data, you would fall underneath PCI DSS. If you're doing any type of loans, investments, or other financial services, you're likely to need to comply with GLBA. And last but not least, if you do provide services or you're a service provider and you're holding onto data of your client, that would be under SOC 2. Again, I just wanted to mention this is because while the focus is on CMMC, there are a lot of compliances out there. We want to make sure that you can go through and attest that you are following the compliances that are needed for your organization. The reason why this is important is we want to make sure that you are protected. And there's been a couple local case studies here that I wanted to mention. One of the big ones specifically for your area would be DaVita. So back in April 2025, there's an attack targeting DaVita, which is a major kidney dialysis provider headquartered in Denver. There was a ransomware group called Interlock that went through and infiltrated the network, filtrating sensitive information. So think about things like names, addresses, birth dates, social security numbers, health insurance, clinic treatment details, really important information that you need to go through and keep safe. While the systems were disrupted, they were able to go through and keep up patient care, but it did go through and take $13.5 million in remediation costs. So going through and increasing care, going through and costing, downtime, revenue collection, going through and taking the time to remediate, make sure the threat actor is out of there. So any type of time that there is an event such as this, it's not just going to be a one-time cost, but a lot of time to go through and take to not only recover, but take action on those key lessons. I did want to go through and touch on a few others as well. So going through and diving into the Colorado architect firm, I just wanted to go through and touch on that because the fact that this is happening not just, in Colorado, Denver and more, but everywhere as well. And we're going through and seeing these threats rise up, going through and having, for example, for them, $100,000 in Bitcoin demanded. If you're thinking about an organization, that's a lot of money. That's, not only just potential years worth of building up for the organization, but also going through and taking the time to recover. Because even though we're taking a look at that amount, there's also extra actions that need to be taken, not just in going through and paying for that ransomware, but also going through and recovering from it and preventing it from happening again. Another one, a Denver nonprofit unknowingly transferred donor funds to a hacker posing as a vendor. So it's very common to go through and perform phishing, deep fakes, which is going through and pretending with like a video to be someone that is legitimate. And last but not least, the Boulder medical practice data breach. There was a loss of $590,000 after an employee clicked on a malicious email. And again, this goes through and aligns with HIPAA violations. So you need to make sure that you are following the frameworks and the security controls to make sure the data that you have is protected and following the frameworks. I know I touched on this a little bit, but I really want to deep dive on it further because a lot of times it's thought to be that CMMC is just to go through and align and check a box. But you can go through and have consequences of regulatory fines starting at $5,000 and going up and above $10,000, $20,000. But more importantly, I want to say it's the loss of the contracts because it's who you're doing business with and the vendors that you're working with. And if you are not meeting the compliances, it could prevent new contracts. And taking the time to implement these security controls at the time you're trying to start a contract can cause a delay on that contract or prevent it at all. Additionally, like we touched on the previous slide, is going through and having these security breaches, or even worse, not just having a breach, but ransomware and data exfiltration. What a lot of companies don't know is that the average ransomware cost for a small company is $638,536. That's a lot of money, especially for a small company. And unfortunately, a breach is not a single cost. So when you're thinking about cybersecurity and the concerns in there, you want to go through and think about, is the company still functional? How long is it going to take to go through and get back up? And we think about those immediate costs to go through and recover, so instant response, legal, and forensics, but there's a lot of long-term costs to go through and really think about on the recovery business. So the lost business, any type of cyber insurance premiums going up, lawsuits, regulatory fines. Are customers going to lose trust in the business? Are you having to go through and put in identity protection and more? There's a lot of aspects to go through and consider when going through and thinking about CMMC. Now, I wanted to go through and touch on how SOPHOS can help, but also really wanted to go through and touch on implementation of where you want to go through and have security controls. So, SOPHOS offers a wide portfolio of security solutions in here. And I touched a little bit on the fact that you have your castle, you have your layers of defense, in which the fact that you want to go through and implement controls on that protective layer. Originally, we talked about the firewall being that outside perimeter, going through and having a wall around your castle to make sure that it is secure. Stepping in there, we talked about going through and having the guards identify who should be coming in and out of your castle. Now, while we don't offer identity directly, we are able to go to and ingest identity services. So if you think about solutions that you might go through and have in place, going through and doing two-factor authentication, we're able to ingest data into that with our XDR. You'll want to have email security in place, making sure you're checking for types of emails that are trying to do phishing, trying to get your users to click on it. Or maybe you want to train the user to say they shouldn't be clicking on these users. Endpoint protection and XDR. We talked about having protections and controls in place to go through and make sure that there are protections in there. And also 24/7 monitoring, or that continuous monitoring that is recommended and required in these different compliances. I want to touch just a little bit further onto our MDR, just because of the fact that that really ties everything together here. The fact that we are going through and not only just going through and ingesting that type of data. So whatever you have, you have your security controls in place here. We're able to ingest it. And it's not just from SOPHOS directly. If you love what you currently have and you want to go through and have better analysis of it, we're able to pull from different event sources. So endpoints, networks, cloud, firewall, identity, and more. And this information is being parsed, normalized to the MITRE ATT&CK framework, correlated so the events can come from one place to another and go through and be centralized in there and correlated together, and then going through and enriching with data. This is prioritized and sent over to our MDR team. The MDR team is an instant SOC, so they're doing that 24/7 monitoring, proactive and reactive threat hunting, and full-scale incident response. So you might ask, well, how does this align to CMMC, especially level 2? Well, you want to make sure that access is limited to authorized users and devices. So you want to go through and have controls in place for that. You're able to ingest event data into SOPHOS on that. Incident response. So you need to have developed protocols for detecting and responding to security events. You'll also want to go through and make sure the fact that there's user awareness and a training to go through and identify security roles and responsibilities. So there are different aspects that we're able to go through and help out with this. But additionally, not just for SOPHOS, but that's why we have CorKat here. Most importantly, we want to work together as a team to go through and help out with providing support on how to go through and meet and get to your CMMC compliance. So I have a few recommendations and next steps here for CMMC compliance, and I'm going to pass it over to Jasmine to help out with that.
Thank you so much, Laura. As we go through these next couple slides, feel free to start putting questions in the chat if you have any so far, and then we will cover those at the end. As we talk about CMMC, what are the next steps? What's the implementation journey if you haven't already begun that? So keep in mind here, this is going to depend on where you're currently at with your maturity level. So step one, we recommend partnering with a security-focused managed service provider like ourselves, CorKat, to build out that control map. Laura talked about the 110 controls that need to be in place. This is over the next 6 to 18 months is when you're going to want to, start getting on top of that, planning it out. And note that this first step takes about 70% of the total CMMC effort. So it's pretty lengthy. And if you haven't started already, now is the time for sure. Step two, expected between 18 months and 36 plus months. This is going to be more of the operational phase. So here we're conducting CMMC level 2 self-assessments, which will be accepted until November of next year. So that's when the third-party assessments are going to be becoming mandatory for these new contracts. Step two is, getting more into the technical improvements. So moving right along to step number 3, we recommend a reversal audit because with the third-party, the C3PAO certified third-party assessment organization, it can be quite costly. So by doing a MSP-led rehearsal audit first, you can save some money by, poking some holes in it, seeing where you might need to bulk it up or show some more proof or things like that before formally having an assessment organization come in and do that for step number 3. So this is over, the next several years. Laura talked about the timeline, so you can always reference back to that. And I often get asked, will I get the recording? Will I get the slides after? So I certainly can send that out, and this will be posted on YouTube. But also feel free to reach out to us at any point, and we're happy to help you along the way. So with that said, we do offer a complimentary network assessment. So what Laura was talking about earlier with like the vulnerability scan and protecting your castle, what we like to do is come into your organization and run a scan similar to that to see where you're currently at. If you're interested in that at all, feel free to scan that QR code to book some time with us over the next couple weeks. Otherwise, our main phone number or website is on the screen as well. So those are additional options to reach out to us.
Well, I just wanted to really touch on the fact that getting CMMC compliance is a journey. So if you are looking to go through and become CMMC compliant, I would start right away, at least going through and putting your ducks in a row to understand more of what you need to go through and do. And that's really what we're here for. So CorKat, you're going to go through and be amazing at helping them out. And SOPHOS, we are helping out with the products and services to help you go through and achieve CMMC compliance.
Mhm.
Again, if there are any questions or concerns, please don't hesitate to reach out.